We're here.
Yay.
We're live.
I think James is muted.
I think James is muted. Yeah.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
You can hear that.
now? Of all the times to lose my connection being finicky. Okay, well, hey, thank you for coming on to the Space Invasion panel, and we're really lucky to have authors Jonathan Brazy, Amy J. Murphy, Rick Partlow, and Sean S.J. Schauer here to talk about the awesome challenges in writing about planetary invasions and why anybody would actually want to do it. We've got about 45 minutes to talk. We're going to have, there's comments that we can get as well. So if in the conversation we don't get to something you wanted to ask about, please put that in the comments and we'll do our best to answer that question. If for some reason we don't get to it, you can also follow up on the Discord. That will be, you can find the link to that on sffcon.com. You can also find more information about everybody on the sffcon.com website. So why don't we take a second and go around, everybody can introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into it.
Well, my name is Jonathan Brazy. I'm a retired Marine colonel, now a full-time writer living in, just moved to Colorado Springs. I've been a Nebula and a Dragon Award finalist. I'm a USA Today bestseller, and I've got about 78 titles published. The vast majority being military science fiction.
Amy, you want to jump in?
Oh, yep. Sorry. That was the order, wasn't it? Hi, I'm Amy G. Murphy. I am the author of the Allies and Enemies series. I've been a two-time Dragon Award finalist at Dragon Con, and I also work as a critical care nurse or a vascular access nurse. And so my series kind of stalled out at book 5 because I had to go, save the world and stuff as a nurse. I like to joke I was taking the apocalypse off from my series. But yeah, book 6 should be coming out in the spring now. So yay.
Awesome. Rick?
Hi, I'm Rick Partlow. I write mostly military science fiction, some space opera. I've written 41 different novels in, I think it's 10 different series now. Next one coming out just a few days is Earth at War. I think I won a drawing for a t-shirt once. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. I was in the infantry as a platoon leader. And I write military science fiction, so I deal with space invasions quite a bit.
And I'm S.J. Schauer. I am an aerospace engineer working for the federal government, primarily the Department of Defense, for the last 20 years. Worked for all the branches of the military during that time. I'm also a full-time single dad, so you can imagine what my writing schedule's been like this year. And I am the author-creator of the Spiral War series of military space opera novels, working on currently on book 6. Hopefully you had the first draft finished of that this month.
Great. And I'm James Aaron. I'm your moderator today. I've written 15 novels at this point, I think. I just finished a series with Jay and Cheney in the Renegade Star universe called Galactic Law, and then 8 novels with Mallory Cooper, MD Cooper, in the AN14 universe. And I'm working on a series both for variant publications and then Aethon books coming out next year. So we've got a great team here. I'm excited with this breadth of experience to talk about our subject today, which is space invasion. And that seems like really simple on its surface, but there's a lot there to talk about. But one of the things I wanted to start with is, what are some of your favorite tropes with space invasion? And I'm going to flip it at the end and ask, like, what's hard about that trope when it comes to trying to write about it. So keep that in mind as we move on. But I don't know, who wants to jump in first? Like, when you think of space invasion, what is the story that comes to your mind first?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, so I know, just the thought that comes to mind is, that very cinematic picture, like specifically for something like Independence Day with the giant mothership, blowing up the White House, right? But if you think about it, that's really not the best way to stage an invasion, because you're destroying everything around you, the infrastructure and everything in the place you want to lay claim to. You're not really helping yourself, right? I'd have to say that the types of invasion I find engaging, if I was seeking to entertain myself, with somebody else's writing, would be ones that would be more of the insidious kind, where you want to make sure that as much as the existing environment of the place you want to invade stays intact. You can take over their infrastructure, you could take over their natural resources, or construction and maybe the population.
Like Heinlein's The Puppet Masters.
Yes.
Puppet Masters, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or what was that one with Charlie Sheen, where they were intentionally Arrival, yeah, where they were intentionally messing up the atmosphere because it made it more appealing to them. What's that?
Not the good Arrival.
Not the good one, the one that was before, yes.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what comes to mind for you about space invasion?
Well, I think what Amy said is the typical tropes, but also like Amy, I kind of tend to shy away from them. War of the Worlds is done. I mean, I should say that because almost everything we write has been written before by somebody else. But I tend to shy away from that, both from a military standpoint, because it makes it highly unreasonable, but also just the whole trope of that coming down and blasting everything away. The only time that makes sense from a military standpoint is if you're raising an empire or something like that, and you're trying to destroy their capabilities to create machines of war and that type of thing. But I tend to shy away and deal with things a little bit differently because, well, when you have one side that's so technologically better than the other, where's the tension?
Mm-hmm. Right.
When I think of alien invasion stories, I think of Footfall by Cornell and Niven.
Footfall is on my list.
That's a good one.
And I think that the trope that I enjoy the most about him is the idea of the technologically inferior Earth that somehow finds a way to rise up and defeat the alien invaders, or at least make the whole thing too expensive for them and force them to withdraw. I enjoy reading that over and over, no matter how many times somebody writes it.
So it sounds like we're hearing, because I was thinking initially invasions of other planets, but it sounds like our minds immediately go to invasions of Earth.
Oh no, we do invasions.
Oh, okay, we could.
Oh yeah, I've got a fair number of invasions of other planets as well. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to what is the motivation for actually staging an invasion. Mm-hmm.
That's the important question,
right? That's actually something I'm kind of flipping on its head in my latest book.
Actually, so am I. I'm writing a book with Jay and Chaney, and it is sort of the. A lot of this book is based on Rorke's Drift, the Battle of Rorke's Drift, where the Zulu are fighting it back against the British. But how do you, as a technologically inferior culture, how do you stage an invasion against one that's more technological, it's higher on the technological scale? And it's kind of interesting trying to figure out the mechanics of it, the strategy of it, figure out how can you, when they're so much powerful, how do you invade them?
I actually wrote a book specifically about that. One of my first science fiction novels was about somebody who is technologically inferior invading a superior force.
Which that's just intriguing because, and I believe it's like a quote that's attributed to Hawking, is just that you would hope that a very advanced life, technologically advanced alien life form wouldn't come in contact with the Earth because they would be more advanced than we are. And then if you look at the long, sad history of just us here on the Earth, whenever you have a civilization that's, more technologically advanced coming into contact with a primitive tribe of somebody, it doesn't turn out very well for the primitive tribe of whoever or something, So it's always very interesting to think that we would be the ones to figure out how to, with our lowly technology, figure out how to overcome a significantly higher achieving, technologically advanced alien invader.
Well, that gets to the question of the motivation, right? Because the advanced race has no reason to come here, but the technologically poorer race technically would have a reason to go get some tech.
Well, that's why the old 1950s tropes about invasions don't really work if you think about them. Nobody would come here for water or gold or anything that you could get cheaply and easily out in the asteroid belt or the Kuiper belt or anywhere in space, and nobody's going to fight you for it.
Yeah,
so it's got to be.
They would have to go past the asteroids and have all
one of the other tropes that's often done is that there's a lot of other more advanced races, and that they have become more peaceful, and because of that, they've lost the warrior ability, the warrior mindset, to say, to call it, and so they have to come to Earth to get people who know how to fight, because they because they are now being invaded by maybe something from another galaxy or something else. Basically, because they have been so peaceful, because they are so civilized, they have lost that mindset.
Yeah, it's kind of like the man's in wars,
or the legacy of the Aldonada.
The war.
I was going to say the last starfighter.
I'd say a good example would be the Manzin Wars, because at the beginning of that, humanity had achieved pure peace, had no weapons, and it was somebody figuring out, hey, this laser drive we have, guess what that is? Big old gun.
Well, that's John Ringo's Legacy of the Aldonada. That's based on that, where the peaceful races have to come to Earth to get us to fight their battles for them.
Yeah. Well, I know, like in my latest, one of the things they're doing is helping to resettle a alien species that lost their world, and it's a larger civilization saying, "Hey, we have a dozen worlds that they're close. They're close enough. You could resettle it, but it's a psychological drive of we want to go home." And even with like you said, it's cheaper and easier just to mine the asteroid belts, to mine the Kuiper belt. But
there has to be an emotional reason.
Right. For some people, it's that feeling of dirt beneath their feet, that feeling of real gravity and not spin gravity or thrust gravity that would drive them to want to settle a planet.
Well, in my books, I have had to come up with like 3 or 4 different reasons why somebody would go to war with another species when they have faster than light travel, which makes no sense on just a purely logical point of view. Because if you can travel anywhere, in a reasonable distance in the universe, why would you want somebody else's system? So there has to be like religious or emotional or some other kind of reason that has nothing to do with logic.
Or a resource that is plentiful in one space but is more expensive to produce in another. For instance, that was a driving in one of my earlier books.
A biological resource, maybe.
Yeah.
So when looking at these, as we're thinking rationally about this problem, I think one of the things, when those first ideas we think of, like invasion stories from the 50s or Independence Day, or the readers are bringing certain expectations potentially to this kind of story, is that difficult to try and bring that around to meet that reader expectation, or is that a challenge to try and kind of bring the reader along with you as you explain why this might not be a good idea? Is that something you've run into?
I have not run into that. People are pretty open to, I think that, readers want tropes. They don't necessarily want tropes that were tired, 50 years ago.
And I think when you're using aliens, if you're doing straight military science fiction, let's say, again, from one human race, one human government against another, that's one thing. When you're and you really have to follow the tropes maybe a little bit more. But when you're dealing with aliens, we just already talked everything from Invasion of the Body Snatchers to War of the Worlds and Footfall. Aliens have such a wide variety of what they can be that the reader almost has, if they're going to read it, they're going to have to be, I think they're more willing to accept a broader panoply of what the story can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go back to say something like Babylon 5, what was the reason for the Earth Minbari War? It was a mistake. It was, they accidentally killed the other race's leader, and that created a holy war.
Yeah,
So
I think religious
sometimes
wars,
you're
I
gonna see
think, are a good fallback too
Yeah.
for motivation. I mean, we know that Earth religions have caused wars before, and we don't know what an alien religion would look like.
Exactly. We can speculate based on experience with our own race and things that we've seen here, and just expand upon that.
Mhm.
So one of the difficulties in space invasion is just the distances involved. How do you approach that, from trying to get that rational kind of scientific method? One of the questions I had here was FTL or no FTL? Like, is that one of the first things you have to answer? And then how do you approach that in a story? And how does that shape the story that you might be telling?
But if you have no FTL and you have people who are like coming from another system where they don't have a habitable planet anymore, that could actually make an invasion make more sense, because they don't have a choice. They can either live in space without dirt underneath their feet, as Sean was saying, or they can take your world.
Or, that's more of I'm thinking more of a refugee situation at that point. It just depends on how warlike they want to be about it. I mean, I'm thinking look at District 9 as an example.
Yeah, but the District 9 aliens weren't actually the ones who built the spaceships.
Right. They were the slave race.
Yeah,
Right.
If you got the guys who built the starship and they come here, well, that's a pretty high technological edge for them to.
Yeah.
At least right now.
But then you even have the whole thing of just the imperial expansion of, let's say you have FTL, and it's just, hey, we want to claim as much as we can so that we can say we have as much as we can. Again, I think it was Niven and Purnell who said, the Earth Empire owned all these planets and the space in between, even though the space in between had nothing. It was just being able to boast, we have this.
Their motivation had more to do with merit than a need for resources or
Right.
anything like
Also,
that.
if there is an aggressive race somewhere else, or there's a fear of an aggressive race, you need a buffer.
Right.
You need areas that you control in space around maybe it's your home planet, maybe it's Earth, maybe it's whatever. But you don't want to be sitting there as a single target, especially if there's rumors or something like that, or you could tell by looking at your big telescopes or whatever that there's indications that there are other races out there. Maybe you want to have a buffer.
See, that's the other problem we run into in alien invasion stories is if they're close enough to come here, why haven't we seen them?
Right. We could see them coming for a long way off, potentially.
So, or even just seeing the effects of their civilization on their star system. I mean, we can detect planets through gravitational anomalies and things like that.
Unless there's FTL.
Yeah, unless there's FTL.
Or gateways, warp drive, all that kind of stuff.
That's what makes alien invasion stories, I think, a little bit more possible, is if there is FTL in your story, because otherwise you see them coming for years.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be relatable for that. You could exactly, if you have one where they're hamstrung by not having FTL, and we're talking generational, or maybe the invaders themselves live so long that eons is nothing to them, that would make a huge difference. But it's kind of almost an expectation, I would say, to have some sort of FTL in a invasionary force, the ones that we're talking about like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And even like you say something like Armor. I mean, Armor, I believe, had an FTL system, but they had to actually get up to light speed to get to it. So you had characters who lived 1,000 years because of time dilation. Armor. So you could conceivably have that in a space invasion story where, yes, they have the ability to get to the speed of light. So time for them relatively stops. But by the time they get to the place, as we said, it's been 1,000 years since they left, and civilization has grown. So that can happen in a non-FTL situation. But yeah, I think FTL does make space invasion easier, and it also allows for misunderstanding space invasion. You get to a world and you see that, hey, here's this aggressor that's conquered this world. That ain't right. We're going to take the moral stance and fight them. And you find out that, well, maybe that actually wasn't the right idea. But let's face it, we've never seen that in history.
No. Jonathan, you sound like you wanted to say something.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Just listening.
I think a lot of to do with the FTL drive. A lot of how your invasion will go depends on how sophisticated that drive is. Because if we want to be any way realistic, if somebody can have a Star Trek like warp drive, they can do so much more that would. If you can control that kind of power, you could basically destroy anything that we could put out there. But if you make it a little more like some sort of gate that they discovered that they can come through, they could be just ahead of us. It would be a more interesting story, I think.
Oh, I 100% agree. I think the whole use of warp drive, and actually most of your Trek science, requires such a control of energy and such a surplus of energy. When you really look at
space-time
and space-time, well, you look at all the technology. The two biggest technologies in Trek, you have teleportation and warp drive, both of which require. Warp drive requires more power than humanity has ever generated to get to the speeds that they talk about. And even the teleportation, you're talking the power of a nuclear bomb right there, if not more, for breaking down and converting matter to energy and back again. Anybody who has that level of technology and that level of power manipulation and space-time manipulation
would not have male pattern baldness anymore.
That's why
We might be
I'm proud. I'm turning
I was thinking.
You wanted me to get it out.
I was thinking of Picard, not you.
One of the things also, you're talking about technology of power and stuff like that. If you've read very much of Mal Cooper's books, she points out that the power of a space drive on a spaceship is basically enough to burn any planet to a cinder.
Right.
So when you're talking about space invasion, if you're just talking about destroying an enemy, creating a buffer, unless you're going to occupy it, you're not going to invade. You're going to destroy. You're going to burn a planet to a crisp.
Depends on how common life-bearing planets are. You might not want to.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing to consider is too the necessity of having something like FTL or some other instantaneous travel would be not only invasion, would be like holding that place that you've conquered, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to stay in contact with it and make sure they stay under your thumb. Just like, it was a lot harder to control the American colonies because we're all the way over here, and they would have to send troops from the UK to come over here and keep us under control. So an invasionary enemy would have to have a plan for how they're going to keep control of their conquered worlds if they don't have FTL.
That parallel would be almost like a fast, slower than light drive. Like if you could get close to the speed of light, and it would take years to get here. It took months to get here from England.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think
that's one of the things too. Is
back to your initial question, is what's the motivation?
Right.
Because in many, many ways, space alien invasion, whether they're invading us, we're invading them, whatever, in many, many ways, it doesn't make a lot of sense strategically, tactically, just the ability to do it. However, we're writers, and we want to write a good story that the readers want to read. So that's why, I have names for my FTL drives and stuff like that, but it's all hand wavium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of my characters are privates and sergeants and stuff like that. Hey, they don't know how the USS Nimitz, how its engine works. They don't know how the amphibious ship works. They just
Very
know
well, thank you.
There.
Yeah, and I think you've got exactly the right point. How much information does the reader need in order to accept that you are using some kind of FTL? Too many authors will spend chapters describing their FTL.
Yeah.
And that was actually something that was a lesson that I had to have a hard time with my first book was I want to explain it, but I want to explain it in a way that the reader will understand and not get bored.
I think it depends on how much the limitations of your drive have to do with the story.
Right.
If it has nothing to do with the story, then nobody needs to know.
No.
But if there's like, oh, we can't jump in past a certain point, and then you can put your defenses there and defend against these people coming in, well, then that's an important plot point, and they didn't know it, but otherwise not.
Well, I know in like Spiral War, what I have is we have jump points. Those are your access in and out of hyperspace. So it's a natural choke point. So how do you invade a system with another race who is of equal technological level, who can create these natural choke points?
I did the same thing with my Fire Ant series, using the same thing, and you had to go into the tactics of clearing a gate. I am gate, choke point, whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
You at that point, because there are limitations, you have to explain that. If it like what Rick said, if it has nothing to do with the story, you just say it is and it is.
Mm-hmm.
You explain the stuff that you have to for your specific story, your specific your specific universe.
I have one series. They're both set in the same universe. One series where it's a Marine going in, and everything that he does is on the ground. It has nothing to do with the drive. He has no idea how it works. I don't describe it at all. In another series, it's got a guy who's flying his own ship that is, fighting out, in space and through this other space. And it's important to the plot and to him how that works. So it had to be in more detail. But the readers don't care if it's not important to the plot.
Yeah.
They won't like you for including it if it doesn't mean anything.
It gets in the way. So what do we think these stories say about, like if you come to this kind of story, is there something you're trying to say about humanity, us getting past warlike nature, or it's always a stand-in for fear, or the Red Scare or something like that from the 50s. Is it just telling a cool, an interesting story, or is there something more that these kind of stories tell about human, motivations?
I would imagine that, if you have an invasion is the meta part of the story, right? And then you drill down to how that conflict affects the individual characters, your main characters. And it's another way to demonstrate, assuming an alien invasion, like how very different or how very similar the aliens are to your main characters, and how that would drive the story as it goes. Does it, oh, look, we're really not that much different, or we're so alien, we're so different, they don't even understand that we're a sentient race down here, and they're not just like wiping out some sort of like fungal growth that they found on this cool new place they want to live.
One of the things I started writing with military fiction. Well, no, I actually wrote a short story, a science fiction short story in 1978 that got published, but then I was all nonfiction throughout my Marine Corps career, but I wrote a novel that was military fiction. And when you're writing military fiction with humans on Earth and everything else, you always have to be thinking about the motivations of the enemy. They're like you, you're like them, you're flying under a different flag and stuff. So there's more of that interaction of the bad guys and the good guys. Whereas when you're doing with an alien, you're able to focus really more on your side. The aliens can be this giant enigma. The aliens, it's hard to understand them. Maybe you get a little more detail, what the aliens want, stuff like that. But what it does is you're not really trying to tell as much both sides of the story, even if you have one POV, is you're able to focus on humanity. And I think it becomes more of a painting of humanity versus conflict and opposing views and stuff like that.
I think it depends a lot on whether you're doing an invasion story where we're being invaded or where we're doing the invading. Because the ones where we're doing the invading tends to work out usually to be an anti-war story that's based on something like Vietnam or the European occupation of the Americas or something like that. Ones where we're being invaded, I tend to see less of a philosophical bent to those, where they're trying to make some point about history, but in more of a survival type of story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of cool things you could do with us being invaded and making a parallel, like say the Europeans coming over to the New World, and maybe think up some ways where the Native Americans could have won. And there are ways they could have. So
I don't know if anybody's read Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor, which really focuses not so much on the invasion, the military style aspect, but how you as a people, they had an alien invasion off of in Nigeria, and how people deal with it, and how you deal personally with it becomes more of an apocalyptic story, a post-apocalyptic story, rather than a lot of the books that we've been talking about, military clashing and stuff like that.
yeah, there's a lot of post-apocalyptic stories where we get invaded, but and I think that's probably more realistic if given the technology it would take to get here, that it would just be an apocalypse that you'd have to survive.
I just lost my questions. One thing I am curious about, since we have Amy here, is are there any like medical aspects or things from that perspective that you would see in an invasion story, or that you haven't seen that you think would be interesting?
I would like to see an explanation as to why, say, an alien race thinks that the Earth is going to totally be biologically compatible with the Earth. Like why they think the Earth is going to be a total perfect fit, but they're aliens. Because just like it unnerves me whenever I watch a movie or a television show where they go to an alien planet, nobody's wearing any sort of protective garb.
Nobody's wearing any environment suits.
It's an alien world. Is there air? You don't know.
Alien
and find out.
I've read. I won't mention the name or anything like that, but the aliens look like humans, but the humans that were female look like men, and the women and the aliens that look like men.
Yeah, she's coming.
Aliens who were their male look like females, and they all enjoyed having orgies together. I was just that one. I mean, and that was also one where the aliens came over to help humans to help them fight, and they took Navy F-14s and put them on a spaceship so they could go battle in space.
Are you talking about Robotech?
Hey, Macross. I'm a lying Macross purist. Rick, don't go there.
But back as far as the other biological thing is too, it's just that in itself would be an insidious means of invasion, where you don't have to have that big cinematic invasion. And the other example I could think of is the Expanse series, with the Leviathan Wakes. They're the very old alien species that are, I guess, probably extinct now, but these other aliens from very, very, very far away decided they don't want anything in our solar system to live, and they wanted to take its own shape. So they send a protomolecule, and it was meant to destroy our planet. It accidentally wound up on a frozen planet somewhere else. But that molecule can take over the organic life everywhere, redesign it in its own form, and make more of that life form. And they have a lot of biomechanoid. There's a lot of almost this body horror that goes along with it, Cronenberg kind of thing with it. And so that's insidious. That's a very clever way to invade a place without ever really having to dedicate considerable resources to it. And you can reach some long distances, and you just sit back and just wait for that, particular invasion to take its time,
That's like terraforming. That's like terraforming the world.
You're terraforming an enemy.
David Gerald's War Against the Chore. He did that where they didn't send invaders. They sent a biology to take over the planet and
Right.
turn it into their world.
Well, like Annihilation, you know.
Right. I was just going to say Jeff Vandermeer's Area X. That's basically what it is, and that is more focused on, I think, the human horror aspect of a slow motion invasion. You know, and that's one thing that we think of these invasions being fast, but kind of like COVID. Like, what if it's slow and you can't convince people it's actually happening, or nobody can conceptualize how slow it's actually happening.
I wrote a series with Lawrence Schoen. It hasn't been my most successful series, but it had an invasion that no one ever realized it was an invasion.
Mm-hmm.
The aliens were kind of a vegetative life form, and they were planting. Basically, they were terraforming, except not Terra, a planet. And for the humans, they didn't understand that, and they're killing the weeds, so to speak. And so no one actually knew it was an invasion by either side until, halfway through the series. When I say no one, I mean the humans, neither the humans nor the alien race.
So what, as we talk about like current stories we've read, like what are some stories you would like to see using the invasion trope, or that you might be excited to write that are coming up? I know Rick's got a book coming out next week, actually. Earth at War, I think you just shared that one. Yeah. But what are some things that excite you about this trope and you'd like to see in the future or see done differently than they have been?
I don't know that there's anything I really want to see that different, but the things that make me interested it's the trope that's in some alien invasion stories where humans are. Somebody called it humans as orcs. Humans are space orcs, because
that's what I'm writing now.
Because all these other species are they've been civilized for so long that they're really peaceful, and they find us and think we're an easy pushover, but we're really, even though we think we're soft, compared to them, we're like orcs, we're like trolls, that they can't handle us. I kind of like that. It's kind of, it's funny in a way, but it's also, looking at our own, examining our own culture, society.
Well, it's also one of those things of seeing humans being manipulated by a more advanced species that does see us as lesser. And that's a good way to actually talk about how in society, how people can be sometimes easily manipulated, and how the voices that are saying, hey, wait, no, get silenced, and how that happens. So that's actually interesting even from an alien invasion standpoint of, hey, we're your friends. We want to help take you out to the galaxy and expand it. Oh, wait, there's these bad guys we want you to kill. Oh. And it's not really that they're the bad guys. It's just that they're their enemies.
Yeah,
right.
It's the propaganda that they're feeding to us too. It just made me think of V. Not so much the reboot, but the original V, and that series too. It's like their whole reason for showing up is that we would be delicious.
We're a delicacy.
Yes.
Well, that's what I've only read like 2 or 3 sci-fis that actually dealt with the idea of incompatible amino acids. Mm-hmm. And if an alien has an incompatible amino acid, and yes, I write that too, what's the point of taking over their planet? Because you can't eat anything except the non-protein vegetable life.
You can't grow anything there. You can't, you would have to bring your own soil.
You'd have to terraform it, basically.
You'd have to ecoform.
But although that would be easier than doing it to a lifeless planet, because at least it's got a magnetic field and the correct temperature and water.
And that's one of the things that in my books they're saying, it's like, why are these guys invading us? Our planets are not compatible with them. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe they're just going to wipe out the planet and reseed it. So, it becomes a plot point later.
Well, yeah, that's the great thing about questions like that is they're limiting, but they also help you to flesh out like a full idea of like a series or a longer a longer thing than just the invasion, a more involved plot. Like, if they are compatible with us, why? Because there's no reason for them to be. Evolutionarily, it makes no sense at all. So if there's a reason behind that, then that makes a backstory that could be millions of years old that you need to that can make things more interesting.
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
we're related.
Maybe we're related, or maybe some other species decided, hey, we like this particular genetic configuration. Guess what we're going to do?
Yeah.
Seed planets, and just then let evolution take its course. And
that's what, and that's something that's been used. My mind's blank. There's a phrase in science fiction for that.
Panspermia.
Yeah, panspermia.
Yeah.
We just had a comment from Lee Nelson saying that aliens will ranch their space cows. Well, I think it all comes back to the motivation. So my mind's going blank as well.
I thought you were frozen for a second.
Yes.
No, how to transition it, because it seems like, space invasion, there's just so much you can do with this story, but it depends on all these pieces of having it make sense, having the motivation. But then how can you get these other little bits of information in there about the amino acids thing, or what that opens up for folks as we learn new things about planets, and our ability to find planets, or just astronomy in general. Are there is there anything you've heard from readers that they would like to see there in this trope, or that you think people are kind of wanting to see more of? I mean, Sean just mentioned Macross / Robotech. Like, there's been a big kind of resurgence of macro, people interested in Macross, and that kind of story. Mass Effect is about to go through getting a reboot, so that could bring in a bunch of new fans.
Oh yeah, they're doing that remaster next year. There goes my productivity next spring.
I know.
I think one of the things that people really want to see more in any kind of space invasion scenario is not stupid invaders.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at something like Battle Los Angeles. That thing was so horrible. Or even, I love the book, the Starship Troopers movie.
Oh yeah, what a horrible movie.
Well, yeah.
I mean, how do you go from these drop troops coming down, burning and nuking everything in sight, to, hi, I'm Johnny Rico running around with the machine gun?
It's because Paul Verhoeven didn't read the book.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that I'd like to see is, because I 30 years as a Marine, and what do Marines do? We go across the beach.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make the transition if you've already decided you're going to invade a planet, you want to take the ground, and anything close to a near peer? How do you get from space down to the ground? I mean, this is like the 82nd Airborne
fire suppression
in the entire U.S. Army.
Fire suppression.
Yeah, I mean, how do you coordinate that? How do your invasionary actually on the ground force is what you're saying?
I have never read anything that I think addresses that transition adequately, or even really addresses it. It's just basically, you go land your ship.
Well, realistically,
the fighting, just getting through the atmosphere, and then saying, okay, if this is a mass invasion and you're bringing in a bunch of drop ships, for instance, you have a mass dropship invasion. It's almost like a helicopter assault in Vietnam. Or do you have something where a large ship comes in and just starts deploying troops, a la the Starship Troopers books? Do you soften them up first with an asteroid barrage? If you're trying to take the planet, an asteroid barrage isn't a great idea.
Contraindicated.
They're big military centers to knock them off guard. But then it's the question of, how do you stealthily drop a group into an atmosphere? And that requires extreme timing and very good timing, and maybe timing it with something like, say, an already meteor shower, and covertly coming in that way.
I mean, it depends on how settled the planet is. If you're invading their home world, that's one thing. If you're invading one of their colonies where they may not have everybody spread over the whole planet, you may have to just go to one part of a continent and get like 2 or 3 cities and to conquer it. But
well, yeah. I think it also depends, like, what's your object. Again, it goes back to objective. It's like,
Right.
do you want to make sure that the people living on that planet or beings living on that planet are the resource you're after as your slave army? Do you not care and you just want the, actual resources of that planet itself, what it is for? But, like, say I wanted to invade a planet, I'd probably send the virus first, something to make everybody sick and, put them out of commission. So I wouldn't have to dedicate that many, troops or, ground forces in.
it depends on how advanced their biotechnology is. It may or may not.
Have they had the chance to gather intelligence on us? Is it something that adapts to the situation? Is it like the mimic things that are in that movie? They always keep changing the title of the movie. The one Tom Cruise, The Day After Tomorrow.
Oh yeah,
and they can tell what we're gonna do.
Edge of Tomorrow. Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow.
That's one thing with
All
those
you need
stories
is
too.
the
the
other one.
original Japanese book.
Yes.
We often miss like the actual scale of what it would take even to say to invade the Earth, like the number of things that would be needed if you weren't going to destroy. From my army perspective, like how are we going to hold this ground, and realistically use it without the resources needed to do that. And
that depends on the technological difference between us and them. I mean, if they're basically in armor that makes all of our weapons useless, I mean, they don't have to invade everywhere at once. They go one place and you can't stop them. And if you shoot nuclear missiles at them, they shoot them down with lasers. It depends on whether they can do that or not. How advanced they are.
They would have to have intel on us to know.
And everything we do is beamed out into space without any kind of filter. So that's not too hard to get.
We'll send the Kardashians at them. Kanye is going to go save us.
That's against the laws of war.
So many embarrassing
Yeah, I was about to say, how many laws of the Geneva Convention does that violate?
Although I think, the sheer amount of ground on Earth you want to conquer. If you say you landed a force that's as advanced from us as advanced enough to have FTL and force fields, which you probably have to have FTL. What are we going to do? Are we going to shoot them with missiles from an F-14 or F-18? It's not going to do anything to them. We could sit there and keep moving our command base further away from where they are, and it won't do any good because there's nothing we can do against them.
Well, I mean, a good example of that would be the book Battlefield Earth, because they make it very clear in the book that the war was over in 5 hours. They basically came in, they were so powerful, they knocked out all of our weapon systems and invaded and took the Earth. And 1,000 years later is when humanity finally was able to stand up against them and fight back. Now, I read the book in high school, and I don't remember if they actually used Harriers or not in that, but yeah, in the movie
it's some damn good Harriers if they last 1,000 years without any maintenance.
Yeah, are there any Harriers flying anymore?
I can think of one really actually successful invasion that it's like kind of, you don't realize it's, the invasion for its face value was Childhood's End. That's essentially an invasion.
Yeah.
And, it's revealed over time that it's like they've been, observing us throughout the centuries.
And that one actually makes more sense.
Yeah.
How it happened.
And it's successful too, because the generations of humans growing up with these ever-present aliens are used to it, and then after a while, everybody that knew it the way it was before don't know, and they won't be around,
Right.
Just like there are people born before 9/11 that, was a thing, and they know what it's like to walk up to a gate with your family in an airport. And there are people that have said, well, there's always been metal detectors there. You can't go anywhere else.
Just why I pulled up to an airport 5 minutes before, because I overslept, 5 minutes before the airplane took off, parked right in front of it, and we ran out on the runway onto the to the where they
Tarmac.
park, and they let us on.
Mhm.
I remember having something similar to that. I was late getting to the airport. I was working at a place called Aviation Challenge, offshoot of Space Camp. I was still fully in my flight gear, had a riser knife in my flight suit, and ran up to the gate. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to throw out my riser knife. And here's this good old boy, from Alabama. Just get on that airplane there, son. Go ahead. And I'm like, okay,
Well, I mean, yeah, human timelines and the things, our ability to perceive and how we perceive the universe is definitely something that would shape this as well. Well, I think anybody else have any like last minute things you wanted to mention, or things you've been thinking about when it comes to the idea of space invasion?
Like I said, I'm writing a book right now where this has been. I've got 2 20-month-old twin girls, which are taking up a lot of my time, so that affects it a lot. But this has been very slow as I'm getting to the battle, the actual getting to the planet and the fight itself. And so this has been something on my mind. So this panel, actually, I've been taking some notes.
Yeah, me too.
I've got a real piece of paper. It's
One thing I would like to see is
that
aliens who come here for a religious war who actually try to convert us to their religion. That would be interesting.
Didn't Straczynski write something like that?
Oh, I don't know. Which one was?
I think he did something similar to that, or it was either him or Card wrote something along those lines. It was a short story of like two alien evangelists debating at each other, or a human evangelist and an alien evangelist debating at each other.
Yeah, well, there are a couple books. Is it the Robin or where the Franciscan friar goes to try and convert an alien race and ends up converting to the aliens' religion. So there are definitely like some folks have explored that.
Oh, there's ancillary justice.
Yeah.
The whole it's all about an invasion. It's a spaceship that happens to also be a person. Mm-hmm. Their role in this of the empire that they represent, but I mean, their emperor it basically gets incorporated into whatever existing religions are there.
So that's another vector for invasion if they can invade our religious sensibility.
The theological.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm working on a series that definitely has an alien invasion vector as well, where basically it's that kind of sanitization aspect we were talking about, where the aliens are, but the humans don't realize that's what is happening. And spoiler alert, that's going to be the big turn that they discover. And I've been trying to figure out the physics of actually destroying all life on a planet to, use the resources on the planet if the life is all gone. So that's something I've been thinking about. So. Okay, well, I think
engineers worked in weapon systems his whole life. Neutron bombs,
radiate everything. So that's about it. I think we've reached all the questions that we had. If anything else comes up, feel free to jump on the Discord. And if somebody posted the link to Discord in our chat, but you can also go to the sffcon.com website. And I admit I'm not super up to speed on Discord, but it's basically just a chat site that allows you to jump into different chat rooms and talk about various the different aspects we've been talking about during the convention. Let's see, do we have time? We got one last question. How much do you draw on historical invasions? And Jonathan kind of touched on that with his new series. But I think we'll probably have to pick up on that one later because we're out of time, so we're going to get cut off here if somebody starts touching on it. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. If you want to learn more about our authors that took part, you can go to the website and check out their work. And yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, stay safe.